outside of kidney stones. It's story number one. Rob Bluey is the president and executive editor of the Daily Signal, and he joins us now on the Will Cain Show. What's up, Rob?
Hey, Will, good to see you. I've never had experience with a kidney stone, so that was quite the conversation. I appreciate a little extra knowledge there.
Well, you're young. You know, you certainly read young. I don't know how old you are, but I've managed to make it half a century without a kidney stone. I hope that I can keep that streak going. But it's, everybody says it's horrific. It's terrible. Second only to childbirth. Kidney stones are not one of the maladies that we have heard afflicted Joe Biden throughout his presidency, but the evidence is now mounting on exactly how far the cover-up went and who was involved in deceiving the American people about the infirmities of their president and attempting to get him reelected. There are those, Rob, who are now saying it was elder abuse, and it's not Rachel Campos Duffy. Rachel Campos Duffy made that argument on Fox and Friends for years and was branded a conspiracy theorist. But now we hear people from NPR, people showing up on Tara Palmieri's podcast, using the term elder abuse when it comes to Dr. Jill Biden. And there's reports that Mike Donilon, one of his chief advisors, made $4 million working for Joe Biden and was one of the chief architects of this deception. What do you think as news continues to trickle out about Biden?
It is a massive cover-up. It's probably the biggest cover-up in U.S. presidential history. I mean, it far exceeds anything that Richard Nixon did during Watergate. And I think you're absolutely right. The blame here I put squarely on Jill Biden. I mean, she obviously must have known about this from being his wife, getting the medical reports that clearly what must have been happening. I mean, Will, I'm old enough now to get, I do my annual physical. They take the blood work. You get the prostate numbers. So I'm well aware of the situation here, and there's no doubt in my mind that they were taking these tests, and we just didn't learn about them. So for all we know, Joe Biden could have had kidney stones, but I don't trust, the White House doctors that were working for him to disclose any of this information. And it's really incumbent, I think, on the part of the American people, and it's probably why you hear this current White House and Donald Trump stress the issue of transparency as much as they do, because I do think that there has been a trust gap that's developed between the American people and the person that's occupying the White House after 4 years of Joe Biden. And one last point, Will, I heard Jake Tapper tell Megyn Kelly that Jill Biden was obsessed with the questions that were being asked in the White House press briefing room. And it is no doubt in my mind that this is one of the reasons why she excluded the Daily Signal and 440 other outlets, because she didn't want to answer those tough questions. She didn't want Karine Jean-Pierre to answer those questions, or she didn't even want to hear those questions being asked.
I'm glad to hear you're getting a regular physical, and I'm glad we haven't seen anything show up in form of kidney stones for you, Rob Bluey. David Lissauer on YouTube says, how about naming Tinfoil Pat's kidney stone Kid Rock? It's a good name for a kidney stone. Kid Rock. I like that. I don't go to the doctor, Rob. I've got to go to the doctor. I'm too old to not have a doctor. I should be getting all these tests. I'd like to think by the time I reach the age of 80, or that were I president of the United States, I'd have easier access. The whole thing confounds me. Like, who's going to be my doctor? Like, I don't have one that I can just call. I don't even know where to start, to be honest. And it's not smart. I got to get to a doctor, but it's inconceivable. It's inconceivable that they weren't doing PSA tests on Joe Biden, which is part of the cover-up. And all of this cover-up, and the cancer is only the latest, is something that is not unreasonable to say is an actual threat to our democracy. And as there's so many things in our life right now, we've learned the power of projection. That is the line that was projected on Donald Trump, that he represents a threat to our democracy. Well, Senator Bernie Sanders, was on a podcast with comedian Andrew Schultz, and they described the way it works with Democrats and basically got him to admit they are a threat to democracy. Watch.
Democrats, we felt that we didn't have a say on who could be president. We talk a lot about the Republicans being autocrats and oligarchs and taking over democracy, but from the Democrat perspective, and I'm a lifelong Democrat, I felt like the Democratic Party completely removed the democratic process from its constituents. And I think they need to have some accountability of that.
No argument here.
Could we not also say, if ostensibly there hasn't been a fair primary for the Democrats since 2008, are they not also a threat to democracy? Yes. We often hear.
Fair enough. That is, yeah, I'm not going to argue with that point.
Incredible. Incredible. And obvious.
Yeah,
That's where we
well,
live today, where everything is incredible and at the same time obvious, Rob.
yeah, they are obsessed with power and retaining power. They felt that handpicking Hillary Clinton in 2016 and obviously preventing Joe Biden from running for office in that year, even despite the fact that he was the vice president, would be their best chance to win. Remember what they did to Bernie Sanders in 2020. They felt that Joe Biden would be the better candidate, so James Clyburn and everybody in South Carolina rallied to the cause and installed Biden, and then Biden ran this basement campaign where basically he didn't have the rigors of what you would normally do in a presidential campaign. And I think it's exactly what was being said there. They haven't had a fair process in terms of picking a presidential nominee, and I think they're probably scared to go through that process. So it'll be very interesting to see what transpires in this next go-round in 2028. And all of those people who aspire to be the next Democrat nominee who served in Joe Biden's cabinet, how can we trust them? I mean, they spent 4 years lying to us about his health conditions. They didn't do anything to invoke the 25th Amendment and have him step down from office. And so how can the American people put their trust in any one of them? I think it probably has to be somebody who's coming from the outside and not connected to this Obama and Biden legacy.
Speaking of what happens in 2028, you looking forward like that? I did want to share with you this thought. This is Mark Halperin, political analyst, talking about the future for Republicans.
Yeah, when he was back in the Florida legislature, he was tagged as someone destined for, a national profile. And his presidential campaign disappointed his supporters. But he is just one of the stars of this administration. Even if you don't agree with his policies, his knowledge of policy, his knowledge, his rhetoric, his confidence, and his winning over MAGA. He went a rough spell with MAGA over immigration. And now he is one of the heroes of the movement. And I said earlier today, I'll say it again, I really do think J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio could end up being a preordained ticket in 2028, unlike we've ever seen before.
He's talking of Senator, now Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and everyone is talking about his level up, basically, recently, in the way he's handled a lot of the hearings before Senate committees, most recently dealing with Senator Tim Kaine. And he's right. Like, Marco Rubio is an early star of Donald Trump's administration, and he's saying that Vance Rubio preordained 2028.
It's certainly possible. I mean, there are any number of people on the farm team, if you will, who potentially could step into that role of vice president. I think Marco Rubio certainly is at the top of the list based on his early performance at the State Department. He's clearly looking forward to these fights on Capitol Hill with Democrats. You saw that over the course of the couple days this week. He does a great job when he's in an adversarial setting, in a media interview. He holds his own and he comes well prepared for those fights. But I think the most important thing, Marco Rubio has been one of the most principled conservatives dating back to the time he was first elected to the U.S. Senate. And so, he came in with that class of leaders, like a Rand Paul and a Mike Lee and others who really were inspired by the Tea Party movement in the early 2010s. And so I give him high marks based on what he's done so far, Will. And I'd certainly be supportive of seeing him stay in public life for years to come.
It's kind of interesting you bring up how long he's been, as you mentioned, a conservative. I do wonder where we sit today, Rob, and I'm curious what you guys think at the Daily Signal. Last night, the House passed a $3.8 trillion spending and tax cut bill. It does have several measures in there with relief for the middle class, like an expanded child tax care credit, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, extension of the Trump tax cuts from his first administration. But the spending reductions are something that keep a lot of people really skeptical. They're not massive. It's not big spending cuts. They're going to tout them. And as many have pointed out, they're backloaded. They're like the back end of a 10-year thing here. And do we ever even get to these spending cuts? And set aside, honestly, set aside partisanship and set aside ideology for a minute. I'm interested in what the bond markets are saying today, and like the 30-year Treasury is up above 5% right now. And the 10-year Treasury is up at 4.6%. That's pretty scary stuff. And the reason it's scary, let's just say why that's scary. It's not just like, oh, bankers are worried. No. Well, we have to refinance government debt on an ongoing basis. And if we have to refinance trillions in government debt at higher interest rates, we are paying a ton of our federal budget towards the interest on our debt. And this is bad news if bond markets are bearish on the future of our ability to handle our debt and deficit. And so I wonder where you guys right now are on this at the Daily Signal. It still has to go to the Senate. I don't have a lot of. I wouldn't stake a lot of hope that the Senate's going to find deficit reduction the House couldn't agree upon. But I'm curious what you guys think of the signal.
Yeah, there's clearly some good things that are in the bill. You mentioned some of them. So, I mean, I think we should applaud Speaker Johnson and the House and certainly President Trump for helping to get the bill across the finish line. And when many people had doubts about whether that would happen before Memorial Day. But, Will, I do share your concern. I worry that the bill could get worse in the Senate rather than better. And specifically on the point you brought up about deficit reduction and bringing down this huge national debt that's staring us in the face. I mean, we have to make greater strides in doing this. You can sense the frustration coming out of Elon Musk this week that Congress isn't going to follow through and codify a lot of the actions that he took in the first 100 days when it came to reducing government waste and some of the spending that has just been abused for so many years.
So
that's
pretty shocking, Rob. Like, why would they not take up Doge cuts legislatively? And I do wonder, is it reluctance or is it strategy? Like, will this be something they can revisit after they pass a government spending bill? They can do it through rescission. So rescission is the White House asks for the Senate to look at cutting spending on specific things, and they have some power to do that. I don't know if they have the power after the budget's passed, but I'm a little shocked they're so uninterested in codifying Doge.
I agree. I don't fully understand why. It seems like a lot of these things have been. I mean, Elon Musk has been litigating the case and took a lot of a big hit to his own personal reputation as a result of this. So he's essentially done the hard work. Now it's just Congress following through and making sure that the cuts are made. But it's one of those things where you have Republicans oftentimes go to Congress, they make these promises, and then they just fail to follow through on them. It's been a frustration now going back to the George W. Bush era. I mean, Bush entered office in 2001 with a balanced budget. And then, of course, we had the tragedy of 9/11. But ever since then, we have not been able to get this out of control spending back to a level where we can have a balanced budget in this country. And it's really frustrating for those of us who are conservatives and want to see limited government in this country. And so not only should Congress codify the Doge cuts, but what I'm hoping you'll see when it comes back from the Senate to the House for consideration is this giveaway on the SALT deductions, the state and local tax deductions, which a handful of members insisted in the House in order for them to have a yes vote. And then there are provisions in there related to the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed under Joe Biden that I think could be stronger, and you could reduce some of the spending there. So there's still some work that the Senate could do, and I'm hopeful that people like Ron Johnson and Mike Lee will stand firm and hold out and make sure that they're hearing the point that conservatives have been rallying around for so long.
One more point before we close the chapter on projection. So for months, we heard that videos of Joe Biden stumbling and bumbling around were deep fakes or cheap fakes. And once again, we have evidence that when someone accuses you of some sin, they are most likely committing that sin. Now there's reports out that the Biden administration was slow motion videoing Joe Biden so that it could be sped up to look like he was walking faster. In short, they were creating cheap fakes.
Yeah. Not only that, but they were apparently shooting at so many different angles and just doing so many different takes because Biden couldn't complete a sentence that they had to patch these things together in a way that made it look authentic. But now we know the truth. Now we know not only were these videos that we were seeing the campaign and the White House put out exactly what you described, Will, the cheap fakes, but also there was apparently so much footage left on the cutting room floor simply because even the talented video producers that were there couldn't make use of it. And so this just speaks how bad things were at the White House. We had no idea. Joe Biden would come out and do these appearances like the State of the Union, and we'd all of a sudden, get these glowing reports from the news media that, he's got his game back, and, look at how much enthusiasm he has. But really, day to day, he was not in any condition to be running this country.
Remarkable event yesterday in the Oval Office, about the same time we were here on the Will Cain Show. I want to walk you through a little bit what happened as the president of South Africa visited President Trump. President Trump said, "Turn the lights down. I want to ask you about stuff that's happening in South Africa."
Turn the lights down. Turn the lights down and just put this on. It's right behind you. Johan.
There's nothing this parliament can do. With or without you, people are going to occupy land. We require no permission from you, from the president, from no one. We don't care can do whatever you want to do. Who are you to tell us whether we can occupy land or not?
All right, that is the South African president being forced to watch videos of political members in South Africa calling for the death, the murder, the killing of white Afrikaners. President Trump has welcomed in 59 farmers, white Afrikaner farmers from South Africa, amidst what he says is genocide. Now, whether or not it amounts to a genocide at this point, it is murder. There are South African farmers who are being kicked off their land confiscation, little to zero compensation, no employment opportunities, and yes, in many, many cases, murder. They dismiss it as criminality. Now, what happened in the White House, it's like a talking point went out, and we've seen it happen before, Rob. We've seen it happen, and it happened on what happened yesterday with what happened in the Oval Office.
To the dramatic scene in the Oval Office today, the tense confrontation, President Trump ambushing the president of South Africa.
Up next, another Oval Office meltdown, President Trump ambushing the president of South Africa.
President Trump is being accused of conducting something of a diplomatic ambush of South Africa's president in the Oval Office.
To be with you, I'm Katie Tur. President Trump orchestrated another Oval Office ambush today.
Today, Donald Trump meeting with the president of South Africa and attempting to ambush and humiliate that leader.
Zelensky territory, where essentially he was
ambushed once again. They all have that talking point over this issue, and they are dismissing this issue as well. Weirdly, they're calling it racist for him to open up refugee status to white farmers.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to be said about this. First of all, one of the reasons why I love Donald Trump is he's so unpredictable, and you never know what you're going to get, even in these settings where, year after year, decade after decade, foreign leader comes in and you expect them to sit there, have a cordial conversation. Not with Donald Trump, that's for sure. And by the way, how was this ambushed when it was a hostile question from a reporter that sparked the conversation to begin with? And remember, it was the South Africa president who interjected and didn't even let Trump answer the question. He said, I will answer this question for President Trump. And it was only after that exchange that Donald Trump said, lower the lights and turn on the video. And I think what Donald Trump is frustrated with, Will, is the fact that you've heard this criticism over the course of the past couple of weeks by allowing these refugees to the United States, despite the fact that they are actually individuals who really do need to escape the violence there in South Africa. I mean, these are precisely the type of people who the United States should be helping, not those who are fleeing for all sorts of other reasons, including criminals who have been let out of prisons in Latin American countries.
We covered it yesterday, including having an interview with one of the refugees from South Africa on the Will Cain Show. But as I mentioned, this has been twisted somehow into actually helping these white people is racist. Here's former New York Times columnist Charles Blow on CNN.
What do you think the phrase "kill the white farmers" means?
Yeah, that's a phrase that the ANC, that was a phrase that, was against the anti-apartheid movement. But the ANC, who's ruling the government, the president's government, has disavowed that phrase, has disavowed any songs, and there's no evidence that white people are being targeted. And the majority of Afrikaners do not want to leave.
They're not a part of the government, Scott. Right. You're taking a fringe movement and you're trying to make it a characteristic.
So it is the height of racism.
It is the height
of racism to say that white people have to be exempted from all violence in any society. And that is what is being said here. If we cannot say, there is no white genocide happening, there is no farm genocide happening, and the argument is some white people have been killed, even though 27,000 murders happened in that country. What are we saying? If anybody of one racial group is murdered, then that constitutes a refugee status for that particular group?
So he has said it's the height of racism to suggest that white people can't be subjected to violence. And then, by the way, I don't think anybody's saying that. These are racially targeted. It's racially targeted confiscations. It's racially targeted laws, which are on the books in South Africa. And it's racially targeted killings. And to suggest it's racism then to extend refugee status just shows not the height of racism, but the height of insanity there at CNN.
It absolutely is. And if you look at the facts of what's going on there, and clearly Charles Blow has not or wants to frame this in a way that is favorable to his personal opinion. I mean, you have farmers who are afraid to leave their property because they feel that if they do abandon it, or in some cases just depart for a trip, that it could be confiscated or taken away. Or they've had to spend money to secure with electric fences and bars on windows and all sorts of things just to stay safe in a country where they were born. And so I think that clearly what Donald Trump was trying to do in this exchange, and what you saw play out at the White House yesterday, was to illustrate, despite the fact that you have so many in the news media, the legacy news media, who want to deny this happening, that there needs to be a substantial conversation about the truth of what's going on in that country. And so I was glad to see that he did that. I don't particularly like the reaction that you're seeing in terms of how they're framing it in terms of an ambush, but I can't say I'm particularly surprised after what happened with Zelensky. But I think that for those people who are interested in watching the full video and seeing it with their own eyes, they will have a different impression than how it's being summed up by some of these news stations.
He is the president and executive editor, and make sure you check him out at the Daily Signal. Rob Bluey, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Hey, thanks, Will. And I'll get a jump in. I grew up near Cooperstown, New York. So my favorite sports movie of all time is Major League. And so a little wild thing there for you.
There we go. It's a great movie. Thank you so much, Rob.
Thanks.